Well, good afternoon, everyone. There's always a lot of talk these days about how partisan the atmosphere is. This week, we're going to be dealing with a bill that I think pretty much breaks through the notion that there can't be bipartisan cooperation to do important things. The chairman of the Banking Committee, Senator Crapo, has been able to put together a revisitation of the Dodd-Frank measure, bringing relief to small and medium-sized banks and credit unions, and has generated considerable Democratic support. So I ask him to join us today to tell you what the latest is on that as we move forward on the Crapo bill this week.
Thank you very much, Mitch. I also want to thank all of my colleagues on both the Republican and Democrat side for the strong showing we had today to move to the debate of this bill on the Senate floor. There have been negotiations on this bill for probably 6 years now or more. We've been working very hard to build a bipartisan solution, and I'm very proud of this solution, and I continue to hold out high hopes that we'll get a similar vote at the end as we have here at the beginning. Just quickly, and then I'll be willing to stand for questions. This bill is called the Economic Growth, Regulatory Reform, and Consumer Protection Act, and all three of those are critical parts of it. It is not just a reg reform bill, it's a bill that focuses on a significant efforts to try to grow capital formation, to increase access to credit, to increase the ability for small businesses to grow and to establish themselves, and to allow individuals to have a smoother pathway toward their own efforts to either buy a home or have an addition to their home or engage in some other important thing to them by getting better access to credit and available capital. With regard to a number of the allegations that have been made about the bill, I'd just like to address some of those quickly and then, again, throw it open for questions. This bill focuses on the smaller financial institutions in America. I know a lot of the attack is that this is going to roll back the regulatory protections that were put into place to deal with abuses on Wall Street. There is very, very little in this bill that reaches to the mega banks or the bigger banks. And in fact, the primary focus is on credit unions and community banks and the smaller tier of our regional banks. Again, it addresses the fact that many of us have talked about for years, and that is that although our regulatory system today was passed and enacted in terms of alleging that it was to address the abuses on Wall Street, many of the targets and recipients of the impact of the bill, of the regulatory system, were smaller banks and credit unions and the like that did not have the capacity to deal with it, and in fact did not present either the business models or the risk models that they were required to deal with on a regulatory basis. And so this bill seeks to right-size the regulatory system in our country and to allow our community banks and credit unions to flourish, and by doing so to provide the necessary and appropriate access to capital and to credit that the people who live in our communities should have. So with that, let me stop and throw it open for questions. Yes?
Just on from the raising the ratio, raising the threshold from 50 to 100/250 right now, why do you think 250, given that it kind of eliminates, I think, 29 of the 38 banks? Why do you feel like that's the right number? Why do you feel like that doesn't open the door to very large financial institutions that do carry a lot of risk in their portfolios to have less regulation or less oversight?
Well, first of all, the level set at $250 billion, as you just indicated, does not even include all of the regional banks, doesn't include any of the mega banks, if you will. And that was a negotiated level. It could have been put higher, could have been put a little lower, but it was a negotiated level where there was the greatest level of confidence that we had provided the most assistance we could without increasing risk in the market, that there would be some kind of a difficulty. Let me make something else clear. I think this is the rest of the answer to your question. There's been this notion floated out there that by exempting the banks from $50 billion to $250 billion from the SIFI process, that we have somehow eliminated a regulatory protection that is in place. A couple of points. First of all, many experts have said that that doesn't increase any risk in the system because the banks in that zone were not legitimately SIFI candidates. But even if they were, the bill allows the Federal Reserve to reimpose any kind of standard that it wants to, all the way up to the SIFI designation level if they choose to. If the Federal Reserve and the regulators see a risk that they believe they need to address, this bill not only allows but encourages them to reach back and address that risk. So the argument that somehow we're deregulating that whole system is simply not true. And I guess I would also say that there is still a tremendous amount of regulatory supervision and oversight before you get to the SIFI regulation and oversight, and all of that regulation and safety and soundness system remains solidly in place. Yeah.
Have you had any conversations yet with the House about their willingness to actually accept this package? I was talking to some of the Democrats who were supporting the bill earlier today, and they were really warning against the idea of there being any sort of conference or an attempt to reopen this later.
Well, yes, we have had conversations with members of the House. Like I said, this bill's been in the process of construction for over 6 years, and I personally have been talking to virtually all of the players. I cannot tell you that any kind of a resolution of what will happen if the Senate passes the bill has been achieved, and we'll simply have to wait until we move further forward in the process to know the answers to what we can get done there. Yes?
Different topic, Senator McConnell.
No, Senator Crapo's up now. I'll be back up later.
Okay.
Okay, more bank questions?
Senator, would you consider amendments to include cybersecurity protections for credit reporting agencies like Equifax to prevent such an episode in the future?
Definitely those kinds of issues are relevant to the bill. The question is whether we can get bipartisan agreement on them. I probably should have explained this a little better, but this is a bipartisan bill, which means a lot of things that the Republicans would like to have put in are not there, and a lot of things that the Democrats would like to have put in are not there. The things that we've been able to find consensus on here, as I've indicated, primarily in the smaller financial institution area, are the areas where we have the most success. So yes, those are relevant issues. The question is just whether we can get bipartisan agreement on any particular proposal.
Senator Crapo, when will we see a manager's amendment, and what are the major changes you're talking about?
Well, I'm not going to discuss any details of the manager's amendment right now. It actually hasn't been finalized, and you know, nothing's a deal until everything's agreed to. But I will just tell you that my hope is that we will be able to come forward with a manager's agreement soon, meaning like in the next day or so. But I can't control exactly when that will happen.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thank you.
John?
Well, if you ask people what's most important to them, more often than not, they'll mention the economy and jobs. And I just want to remind all of us that since the beginning of 2017, we not only were able to repeal a lot of the overregulation, not just in the financial sector that Senator Crapo's talked about, but across the board in a way that unleashed the potential for the American economy, followed on by the largest tax reform bill really done since 1986, in a way that's become increasingly popular as people have seen more take-home pay, bonuses, pay increases, and those sorts of things. This morning on the floor, I had a chance to talk about one of my constituents who runs a small plumbing concern and what she has been able to do as a result of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and what Senator Crapo is talking about here, giving small community banks and credit unions the ability to lend more money to those small businesses so they can get the access to capital they need either to establish a business or to grow their business, is going to continue on this same theme, create more jobs, help grow the economy, and help people pursue their dreams.
Yeah, the effect of Dodd-Frank has been to make big banks bigger and small banks smaller. And what Mike Crapo has, I think, very successfully done, along with his colleagues on the banking committee in a bipartisan way, is start to allow smaller banks, and I represent a lot of community banks and credit unions and others, to get out from under what is a very heavy regulatory and costly regulatory burden. If you look at the impact that this has, I mean, most small banks in rural areas of the country don't have huge compliance shops to be able to keep up with the heavy cost of regulation. And so he's crafted a solution which preserves the protections that are there, but gets us away from what was an overburdensome, overreaching regulation that has had the opposite of the desired effect, and that is it has made big banks bigger and small banks smaller. And this legislation is perfectly consistent with our pro-growth, pro-jobs agenda. It's going to make more credit available for mortgages and homes, help small businesses expand. And if you look what's happening in the economy right now, this last month in February, we saw the jobless claims, weekly jobless claims, at the lowest level since 1969. In the month of February, we saw the biggest expansion among businesses since 2004. And consumer confidence was at the highest level this last month than at any time since 2000. So the economy is moving in the right direction. That's what we're working on. We're going to continue to stay focused on a pro-growth, pro-jobs agenda that's good for the American people. And the legislation that we have on the floor this week is another example of how we're continuing to move that ball down the field.
Well, people continue to ask me in the halls about the funding of government, the omnibus, and what we're going to do, and specifically questions related to the CSRs, the cost sharing reduction related to the health care law. You'll recall that President Trump decided to no longer make those illegal payments back in October. But as the discussions continue around the upcoming omnibus, I would say that if those things are going to be discussed and considered, we need to do much more to actually lower the cost of insurance and allow people to buy insurance policies that work for them and work for their families, and give them the freedom and the flexibility and choice that the American public wants. And I think President Trump is headed absolutely in the right direction by reversing some of the things that President Obama did with policies that are called the short-term policies. Those are the 90-day plans. President Obama made it a lot harder for people to use those effectively. President Trump expanded it to make it easier. I think the president's on the right path. We need to go even further. We need to give people more choice and allow this to be permanent. So I'm introducing legislation this week to do just that, to give people more freedom, have states make the decisions about what could be sold in their own states as opposed to the federal government making that decisions, letting people get out of and away from some of these very challenging situations they find themselves in because of Obamacare, and give them the freedom to buy what works for them, what works for their families, and what they can afford, rather than what they've been mandated to buy under the Obamacare plan.
I just want to mention one other bipartisan piece. It's not a big piece unless you're a family that can take advantage of it. In Senator Crapo's bill, the Family Self-Sufficiency Act, it combines two public housing programs. It expands the ability to transition more appropriately off of government support. It lets more people have access to help to get a GED, to go to college, or get a certificate, and passed the House early this year, 412 to 5, and so it's not only very bipartisan, hopefully it's a little engine that helps drive this bill in the direction it needs to go, which is the support of the Senate and then the House.
Leader McConnell.
Yeah.
Thank you. What do you think of, as you approach the omnibus and whatever the government funding mechanism has to be, what other sorts of things have to be added on to this to sweeten? Do you anticipate something on DACA? Do you anticipate something on background checks or firearms things that people say, we have to get that in there or we're not going to listen to this?
Well, we're just in the middle of the process of what might be added to it, but obviously we're not going to pass another CR, so we need to do this omnibus. I'm confident we're going to get there. The bipartisan talks have been good. I can't predict for you what extraneous items may be included, but there almost always are some. Ed.
Over the weekend, President Obama's former Chief of Staff, Senator Dunn, accused you of, I believe it was dramatically watered down joint statement on election security back in September 2016. What's your recollection of this, your comment in response?
Yeah, this is the same old thing they've been saying for weeks. I've issued a statement on that a couple of weeks ago, and I'll be happy to send it to you again. Yeah.
On the tariffs, we haven't actually heard from you yet on the president's tariffs.
Yeah, well, look, I think...
And do you think that the Senate Republican caucus, which is very upset, it seems, about this, can do something to slow the president doing this?
Well, as you know, and you've been reporting, there is a lot of concern among Republican senators that this could sort of metastasize into a larger trade war. And many of our members are discussing with the administration just how broad, how sweeping this might be. And there's a high level of concern about interfering with what appears to be an economy that's taking off in every respect, as you've heard others suggest here today. So, yeah, there's a high level of concern about it. There are other steps he needs to take, and we're looking forward to seeing what he decides to do. Nancy?
Just to follow up on Ed's question, do you wish that now, looking back, that you had been more proactive about warning states about this Russian threat?
No, I'm perfectly comfortable with the steps that were taken back then, and you can check with Stu, and we'd be glad to walk you through it one more time.
What is your sense of whether the White House would be open to concessions to some of these tariffs? Would they make allowances for certain countries or certain products?
Well, I'd rather just stay where I was, which is I think there's a lot of concern that this might kick off something much more substantial. There's been some discussion about linkage to NAFTA. I just say from a from a Kentucky point of view, NAFTA's been a big winner, and we've benefited from it in every way. And so I think the best way to characterize where most Republican senators are right now, including myself, is genuine concern that this not escalate into something much broader.
But is the White House listening? Are they hearing?
Well, I think they are. Yeah.
Senator,
Just a follow-up.
David?
Have you had a personal conversation with the president about this? And from a messaging standpoint, do you worry that it's going to muddle the message in terms of selling the tax bill and the benefits you think it's had on the economy if the White House is saying one thing about the economy and you're saying another?
Well, I think we need to wait and see what the White House finally decides to do on this. And I think the best way to characterize where I am and where our members are is we are urging caution that this develop into something much more dramatic that could send the economy in the wrong direction.
Senator McConnell.